Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be discussing the Feb-March Paper 32 MCQ exam. So without wasting any time, let's get started. However, if you're new to my channel, please subscribe so that you're aware of all the notifications that you may receive on YouTube for MCQ videos. The first question says, what is the correct formula for calculating average fixed cost? Pretty simple, straightforward question. We all know what average fixed cost is. I'm sure most of you will get this right. Total fixed cost divided by the quantity. Fixed cost, we know that it is the cost that does not change with output, and hence, your AFC will fall as the quantity increases. So the answer is D for David, total fixed cost divided by quantity produced. Pretty simple stuff. Question number 2 is which states which statement about an indifference curve is correct? Again, a pretty simple question. We know that an indifference curve shows different combinations of two goods that give the consumer the same level of utility or satisfaction, and that gradient of or slope of the indifference curve is determined by the marginal rate of substitution, right? Which, and the MRS means that the rate of substitution of good X, and the fact that the MRS is diminishing, it means that the rate of substitution of good X for good Y, it is sort of diminishing as you increase the quantity of good X, right? Meaning that the quantity of good Y that the consumer is willing to sacrifice would decline when he tries to get more and more additional unit of good X, because obviously quantity of good Y starts getting scarce and the utility from additional good X starts to fall as well. So the guy is like, oh, you know what, I'm not going to give so much of Y anymore. So question number 2, the correct answer for question number 2 has to be C for Charlie. Its gradient is determined by the MRS, which is the slope of the IC, which starts falling as you go down the IC. Question number 3 says which diagram shows the cost and revenue curves for a monopoly firm. Now the thing is, at which price will the firm sell if it follows a policy of revenue maximization? Usually they give these sort of questions where they ask you the objective. This is basically the objective of the firm topic. Right, now a monopoly would maximize revenue where MR is 0, and the reason why the revenue would be maximized at MR equals 0 is pretty simple, because MR represents an additional revenue from selling an extra unit, and when no extra revenue would be gained because MR is 0, it means that we have reached the maximum revenue, right? So that would be the point where MR equals 0, and which should be a price of B, right? And hence this is the answer. So got it. So the fact that MR is 0, at times they would ask the quantity, maybe they label B over here, and because they might be asking about the quantity, so the quantity would be this much, where MR is 0 at a price of B on the AR curve, because price is read off. You read off the price from the average revenue curve. Got it? Now, by the way, option A says the price you're charging is A, and at A, your MC equals MR. So this is like the profit maximization objective. MC equals MR, so you're charging a price of A, and you're maybe selling Q1, but Q1, I mean, this is relevant, but maybe options could be like A, B, C, D at times here as well. So I'm just letting you know that this is the quantity and the price is A. Well, the price of B would be charged when you want to maximize your revenue. Okay, my bad. This should be revenue maximization, should be where MR equals 0. My bad. Okay. Well, option C, where at a price of P, you're achieving allocative efficiency, because at this point, your P equals MC. So this is a point of allocative efficiency. Monopolies usually don't have this objective, but they might be forced to have this objective, especially if the government intervenes by implementing marginal cost pricing, or implementing some sort of a minimum price which is actually equivalent to the marginal cost, or maybe the markets are very highly contestable. So in that case, option D says and option D is where your AC equals AR, which is this point, and at this price, usually the objectives are growth maximization. You can also say sales maximization, where you want to expand output and increase market share. So that's the objective, because you want to sell a higher quantity. Look at the highest quantity is sold over here, right? So that could be the objective, growth or sales maximization. But when they're talking about revenue maximization, they're talking about the revenues, right? Total revenue. So okay, so total revenue is where MR equals 0. Got it? That's the point where it's maximized. Now the next question says, now by the way, if you want access to this file, you can follow me on Instagram at on my Instagram handle, and you can DM me. You'll get access to this file as well. Question number 4 says, an oligopolist with a kinked demand curve decides to raise its price. Why might it do this? Now we know that the theory of oligopoly tells us that there are different models that sort of explain us the behavior of an oligopoly, right? And one of these models, this king demand curve, is sort of talks about price stability or price rigidity. That is, it's in the best interest for the oligopolist to keep prices stable. So in a king demand curve model, remember that an oligopolist would avoid changing prices because rivals may react unfavorably. If the firm would raise the price, rivals will not follow, so it would lose the customer, so it won't do that. While if it cuts the price, rivals may follow, which will cause a price war, and hence its best interest is that it keeps prices stable, and this creates price rigidity. So the king demand curve model assumes that if the marginal cost, despite the fact that the marginal cost is going up, but we also know that the marginal revenue is discontinuous, right, within a certain range. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail that why is this discontinuous, but we usually explain this in the class of the reason behind this. So this is discontinuous in this range, and if the marginal cost increases, even if the marginal cost, and the king demand curve theory says that if MC lies anywhere in the vertical gap, which is the discontinuous region of the MR, prices will remain stable even if MC is rising in the discontinuous MR range. So but the point is that the king demand curve is explaining that the MC is rising within the discontinuous range, so price would be stable. But what if the MC rises too much, or MC rises considerably? There's a massive increase in cost of production, a massive increase in marginal cost. In that case, let's say if the marginal cost goes up somewhere like this, so MC equals MR over here, and hence prices has to rise. So it's oligopoly will end up raising prices, right? So if there's a large increase in cost, the oligopoly firm may be forced to raise price even if it doesn't like it, because keeping the old price of P star may no longer be profitable for the oligopolist, right? So the option has to do with A for alpha. It has a large increase in cost, right? B is wrong because it says it is starting a predatory pricing strategy, and predatory pricing strategy involves price cutting, not raising it. The question is asking about raising its price. C is also wrong. It's trying to price discriminate. It's wrong because price discrimination means charging different prices to different consumers, not simply raising one market price, right? And D is also wrong. It wants to start a price war. D is wrong because a price war would normally start with price cuts, not price rise, right? So that's why question 4 is A. Question 5, what is called when consumer's marginal utility is greater than the price paid for the good? Now, consumer surplus equals to the willingness to pay minus your price, right? And I have videos on utility theory on my YouTube as well. I've explained this concept a million times now in my classes as well, that willingness to pay minus price is actually equal to consumer surplus. And willingness to pay is actually how much you're willing to pay. So if you go to watch a movie that has recently been released and you're paying a ticket which is costing you, let's say, $100, but it's your favorite movie and you've been waiting for it, so you are willing to pay, let's say, even $1,000 for it. So your consumer surplus is actually 900, and this is willingness to pay is actually measured by marginal utility. So it technically means marginal utility is greater than price. So marginal utility is reflecting satisfaction, which is reflecting in monetary terms how much you're willing to pay, right? So the answer for 5 should be C. All the others are incorrect. Got it? I'm sure a lot of you might have got this right. Question number 6 is again an easy question. It says which quantity is most likely to be produced by a firm operating under free market conditions. So you have these marginal private costs, marginal social costs, marginal social benefits, and private costs given, and they're asking you. Sometimes they will just make these lines a lot confusing rather than making straightforward lines. Sometimes they'll make these lines, instead of making them parallel, they make them ad valorem. Sometimes they'll start these supply curves from the origin. You don't need to worry about that, okay? You don't need to. This is just done to confuse you, okay? And obviously it's a test. It's a test of your nerves as well, and a test of your patience as well. So you need to calm yourself down. Now, question number 6 is, now what quantity is likely to be produced by a firm operating under free market conditions? So if you're operating under a free market condition, you know that a free market firm would ignore the external costs and only looks at the private cost and the private benefit. So the free market price and the free market quantity would be P times Q, right? Where the marginal private benefit intersects the marginal private cost, and this has to be at a point where, so MPB equals MPC. So if this is MPC, let's look at where MPB is. So this is MPB. So the answer has to be B for boy, right? The answer has to be B for boy. Got it? I hope I'm circling all the answers. Yeah, I am. So question 6 has to be B for boy. Moving forward, question number 7, which says which combination of factors, and by the way, the reason I'm asking you to get back to me on Instagram and have access to this file is because there are many notes written on the side which will actually help you in revision, okay? So you can give us a follow on Instagram and you can request access and we'll share it with you. Question 7, which says which combination of factors would make it difficult for for a cartel to fix the market price of its product. Now the thing is that a cartel would sort of act like a monopoly by restricting output and fixing the price, right? And the thing is that for a cartel to succeed, if the oligopolists, which are simply a market comprising of very few dominant firms, who are a lot interdependent with on each other. So and the concentration ratio between, let's say, the 4 or 5 firms is more than 40%. So for a cartel to succeed, two things are very, very important. Number one, there should be very high barriers to entry, and number two, most of the firms in the industry should be members of the cartel. So if, let's say, these 4 firms have formed a cartel, then for them to be successful, there should be very high barriers to entry, and most of the firms in the industry should be members of the cartel, which means that, let's say, if there are let's say 7 firms, then 4 out of 7 firms is like more than half of the firms should be in the cartel. Now there's no number that more than half or less than half, but most of them. So it's right. So the thing is, and I'll tell you why this is, because the thing is that why do we say that barriers to entry matter? Because if barriers to entry, so the answer for question number 7 has to be D for David, where the proportion of the firms in the industry that are members of the cartel are low and the barriers to are low, because the question is saying that which combination of factors would make it difficult for a cartel to fix the price. Not easy for the cartel to fix the price, difficult for the cartel. The word difficult is acting like a distractor here. The examiners give you distractors because they want to distract you to the concept that you've studied. So the thing is that when you study a concept, your neurons and neurotransmitters in your brain, they sort of form connections and signals, and they learn a certain trajectory for the economic course, and based on that they sort of perceive something. But there's a distractor in the MCQ option. It's a trap, right? And so this was a trap. It makes it difficult for the cartel to fix the market price of the product. So what the question is saying is that if barriers to entry are low, if barriers to entry are low, the thing is that if barriers to entry are low, what will happen? What's the problem? I mean, the thing is that if barriers to entry are low, then new firms can easily enter the market. And if the cartel is raising the price, acting as a monopoly and raising the price and restricting output, that's what a cartel will do. I mean, these 4 firms would now act like a single monopolist, raise price, reduce market output. And if new firms can easily enter the market, so isn't that sort of makes it contestable? And so new firms will take it. And the thing is that what these new firms would do? I mean, if you're entering the market, then these new firms would take advantage of the high cartel price. I mean, cartel is sort of increasing the market price, and these new tiny small firms who have just launched will enter the market, and they'll end up taking advantage of the high cartel price, and they might be more efficient and they might just capture the market share. And this sort of weakens, you can say, the cartel's control or dominance over the market price, which the cartel had set initially. So that is why the barriers to entry should be very high, and if they are low, it will make it very difficult for the cartel to sort of fix the price, and not only fix it, but instead maintain and sustain that price. And this, by the way, this doesn't has to do anything with cheating between the cartel members. It's not that the cartel members are cheating. It's just that the market dynamics are such that the cartel price is not sustaining, right? Because the barriers to entry are low. So new firms can sell at the same price as well. Because the objective of the cartel was that, we're going to reduce the competition amongst ourselves, and we are all going to sell at a very high price and act like a single monopolist and reduce the market quantity, and we'll distribute the quotas amongst ourselves and sell it at this high price. And I'm sure you must have studied all this stuff in P4. So, and the second option, the second thing is that why low cartel membership would matter. Like, why are we saying that there should be low cartel membership? I mean, see, the thing is that, I mean, if only a few firms join the cartel, then it means that out of 10, 15, 20 firms, only 2 or 3 have joined the cartel. It means that a lot of firms outside the cartel still exist that can continue to operate independently. And if they're operating independently, then they might start, cutting prices or undercutting prices. And they would end up stealing customers. So if the cartel is fixing a price of, let's say, $100, then all the other firms are selling at $50 or $60. And the thing is that, only 2 or 3 firms are part of the cartel membership. So who's the one dominating here? Who's the one who's going to take the cake? The people who are outside of the cartel. So those outside firms may undercut the cartel price and steal the customers. So the cartel cannot effectively control the market in that context. That is what will make it difficult for the cartel to fix the market price and sustain it and run it at that cartel price, right? So question number 7 has to be D. Which combination of factors would make it difficult for a cartel to fix the market price of its product? The proportion of firms in the industry that are members of the cartel has to be low, and barriers of entry into the industry has to be low as well, right? Now question number 8 says a cafe employed 5 staff and paid them each $10 an hour when extra staff were needed. The employer had to increase the hourly wage rate for all the staff. Now the fact that it's written that the hourly wage rate for all the staff had to increase to 12 an hour is giving the the most important monopsony idea that hiring one extra worker may require increasing wages for all the existing workers as well, right? So if you look at, so now what was the marginal cost each hour of employing 2 extra staff? Now for what you simply need to do is that you will calculate the new total wage cost for 7 employees, which is, you had 5 initially, so 12 times 7 would give you $84. That's your new total wage cost, while the initial wage cost was simply 10 times 5, right? $50. So your it's just such a simple question. What was the marginal cost of employing 2 extra staff? Would be the answer to question number 8 would be C for Charlie. Got it? So 8 is C. Now guys, moving forward, the question number 9 says the government of a country allows each factory in the fertilizer industry to discharge 10,000 liters of liquid waste into the rivers each year. If the factory discharges less than 10,000 liters, it can sell its remaining allowance to another factory that wants to discharge more than 10,000 liters, which is okay. Now, what does this illustrate? So they've given you a scenario and they're asking you that this sort of mechanism where the government is allowing allowing the factories to discharge certain amount of waste into the rivers, but for those who want to discharge more versus those who want to discharge less. So what is this sort of scenario representing or reflecting or telling us about? So this is basically known as tradable pollution permits, and it's a method that the government uses to reduce negative externalities in climate change, environmental pollution, to reduce social costs basically. So tradable pollution permits is also called pollution permit schemes by the government, and it's basically, by the way, it's a market based environmental policy, right? It's market based policy. Remember that. So the government here, why are we calling it market based? Because the government is not directly banning pollution, and instead it sort of creates a market for pollution rights. Here the government is going to give you pollution permits. Okay, fine, you're permitted to sort of discharge 10,000 liters every day, let's say. So now what happens is that, let's say you were discharging 15,000 liters, but now you only have to discharge 10,000 liters. But the point is, you're only allowed to discharge 10,000. The thing is that you have the capacity to, or you're using a very good technology that can actually allow you to reduce waste to even below 10,000. Let's say you can reduce waste to 9,000. Now you've got that buffer of 1,000 liters of extra waste that you can still discharge in the river. But the thing is, now what you'll do is that you'll sell it to someone. So there's a market, right? So firms, you can sell it to someone who has already discharged 10,000 and he cannot reduce the limit to 10,000. efficiently. I mean, for him, it's very expensive to reduce that limit. So maybe he was initially discharging 13,000. So he can't really reduce. Sorry, he was initially discharging, let's say, 11,000. But now he can't really bring it down to 10,000. So what he'll do is that he'll buy the extra 1,000 from you, right? So I'll give it. So basically, what you're saying is that firms, what happens is that those firms that can reduce the pollution cheaply will reduce these emissions and sell those permits. A lot of students don't really understand the whole concept of pollution permits, and I explain it in this video. So firms with high pollution control cost may actually prefer, they will not reduce the pollution because they can't. What they'll do is, I mean, they can, but their cost is very high. So reducing pollution for them, it would be inefficient. So they'll buy it from someone, from someone who has reduced pollution to below the pollution permit, and he had the potential to do it very cheaply. So this allows a pollution reduction to happen at a very low overall cost to society. And if this happens, this mechanism is very efficient. And I'll just give me a minute. I'll just explain it to you. So basically, what we are noticing over here is what's happening is, let's say two factories. You have like factory A and let's say you have factory B, and factory A can reduce pollution. It can reduce the pollution very easily, right? It can reduce pollution very easily because maybe it has a technology or something. So very easily and cheaply, right? Or maybe reducing pollution, I mean, the sort of raw materials it's using is actually very much polluting, but then the product it's producing, it can use a substitute raw material that doesn't really pollutes a lot, so and it's cheaper as well. So for factory, it's easy to reduce pollution easily and cheaply, while for factory B, reducing pollution is factory B finds reducing pollution very expensive, so it can't really reduce pollution to 10,000, while factory A can reduce pollution to less than 10,000 very easily. And each factory, let's say, is allowed to pollute, let's say, how much? 10,000 liters, right? So that's like a permit. You're permitted to pollute 10,000 liters, right? So now factory A improves its machines and it only pollutes 6,000. So let's say factory A is only polluting 6,000 liters, right? So it has this buffer of 4,000 liters available to itself, right? Which is sort of unused pollution rights, right? It's unused pollution rights, you can say, right? So it can actually sell those unused pollution permits to, you can say, factory B, right? So while factory B is, it's old, it's inefficient as well, it's like a old dumpster. I mean, reducing pollution for factory B is very, very expensive for factory B, right? So, and the thing is that factory B wants to pollute 13,000 liters. It has no choice. I mean, that's the amount of waste it produces, and it can't really reduce it. So it has to pollute 13,000 at least to make the factory, because whatever it's producing, it's selling, and it can't do anything about it. But this factory B is only allowed to produce 10,000. So what it will do is that it needs to buy these extra permits. Factory B needs to buy extra permits, so it buys the unused permits. It buys the unused permits from factory A. Now you need to understand the logic. What's happening is that the government is basically creating a market for pollution rights, right? Because now pollution becomes something the firms could trade, buy and sell, and this is efficient, right? That's why in one of the MCQs they tested this, because it's efficient, because it allows pollution reduction to happen at a lower overall cost to society. And see, suppose reducing pollution for factory A cost only $100, right? So for factory A, reducing pollution costed only $100. Let's say it was very cheap for factory A. So factory A happily reduces pollution and then ends up selling the permits to factory B. While for factory B, reducing pollution was costing $1,000. So factory B, it was very expensive. So instead of reducing pollution itself by factory B, it just ends up buying those extra permits. So what's in it for the society? Obviously, there is in it for society. What's in it for society? Number one, pollution reduction happens mainly because now the firms can reduce pollution very cheaply, right? And those firms that can reduce pollution cheaply, they end up reducing it and then selling it. They're selling their permits to those firms who cannot reduce it cheaply. So society overall is achieving pollution reduction at the lowest total possible cost. This is the entire beauty of the system. I mean, the government isn't really telling every firm that you must reduce the pollution by exactly the same amount. That would have been inefficient because some firms could reduce pollution cheaply while others could not. But instead, the government has created a market. That's why we see the market mechanisms are efficient. So instead, the government says, okay, fine. You know what? Here's the total pollution that is allowed, 10,000 each. So you firms, I mean, that's your headache. You figure out the cheapest way amongst yourself, and the market mechanism then automatically shifts, the pollution reduction towards low cost firms. They end up reducing pollution and then selling those pollution rights to inefficient firms who can't really reduce pollution. So overall, the society is able to bring down pollution, but at a low cost, right? So overall cost of society is low, and it's a market-based policy. Now the question says, what does this illustrate? It illustrates a pollution. So this was pretty obvious from the MCQ. I didn't really have to go into all these details, but usually students aren't really aware of these concepts. In fact, sometimes they even test you, why is it a market-based? But they could test you by saying, they could give you an MCQ by saying that one of the options for tradable pollution permits could be that it allows pollution reduction, or it allows pollution control or reduction to happen at a lower overall cost to society. That would be the right answer if they were asking you what is true about tradable pollution permits, right? So that's question number 9 for you. Now moving on to question number 10. Again, that's a pretty simple question, straightforward question. It says that what is not an example of government failure? Now we know that in the free provision of health, so the government is providing healthcare free at the point of consumption, right? So government failure, what is exactly is government failure? Government failure is when it occurs when your government intervention to improve outcomes leads to resource misallocation. This, my bad. Leads to resource misallocation, right? It leads to resource misallocation, number one, or it leads to inefficient outcomes. So I mean, it results into so massive unintended consequences that the whole purpose of the policy intervention gets distorted, and it results in worse outcomes rather than improving outcomes. So what is not an example of government failure in the free provision of healthcare? The answer is A for alpha, because you see, if the government is providing free, what is not an example? So in option A it says equal access to healthcare. Well, this is certainly not an example of government failure, because in option A you're improving equity, you're improving accessibility, you're improving overall social welfare by providing free of cost, right? And plus, providing free of cost would improve the productivity of the workforce as well, because it would reduce malnutrition, reduce death rates, improve health overall, so productivity would rise. So that is not market failure. I mean, that is not government failure basically. The rest are examples of government failure, like inefficient spending on vaccinations, right? And because the fact that you're inefficient spending on vaccinations, this can create, this could sort of create, maybe under provision or over provision on spending on vaccinations, right? Long waiting times, again a problem. And by the way, long waiting times to see doctors is a common issue in public healthcare systems where the government is providing it free of cost due to excess demand and resource shortages. Then excess unused supplies of unused medicine this is representing waste and inefficient allocation of resource. So A has to be the correct answer. Now moving on to question number 11 is a good question. It says a diagram shows the initial equilibrium in a labor market. D1 initial demand curve, D1, this is your demand curve initial, and this S1 is your supply curve, and this is your equilibrium wage rate and the number of workers employed in this particular labor market. What changes in the market will cause the largest increase in economic rent? So first let's understand what the concept of economic rent and transfer earning is. You see, the thing is that if let's say that I need to hire a worker, and that worker is earning $800 somewhere else. He's earning $800 somewhere else. So the minimum I need to pay him to work in my organization is $800. I mean, that's the basic minimum that he will work on, right? But if I pay him $1,000, right, he's earning 200 extra. So this extra is basically known as the surplus is basically your economic rent, while this 800 is simply your transfer earnings. And technically, what this means is that based on this example, if you look at what transfer earning is simply the minimum payment that is required to keep a factor of production, that is labor, in its current use, right? Which was $800 in our example. And economic rent is simply the income that, or the money that is earned above transfer earnings, which was 200. And remember that economic rent, the size of the economic rent, how large or less it would be, would depends heavily upon the elasticity of demand for labor. So economic rent is simply the surplus income that is earned, and the reason why, so it is a surplus income that is earned due to scarcity or unique ability, right? And I'll tell you what this line, the fact that I'm referring to scarcity or unique ability, I'll come to that. Obviously, I mean, if a person who's earning $800 somewhere else and you want him to work for you, then possibly that person has a unique ability, and the fact that labor is scarce means that you would end up paying him more than what he is earning elsewhere. So this is one way to look at it. But then there's another way to look at it through the demand supply model, and I'll come to that as well in this explanation. But there are two things that you need to know for MCQs, and that is that economic rent would become larger, or the size of the economic rent would be very high when labor supply becomes more inelastic, right? When labor supply becomes more inelastic. So inelastic the labor supply, write that down. Inelastic the labor supply, the higher the economic rent. The elastic the labor supply, lower the economic rent, right? And secondly, demand for labor rises. See, when demand for labor will rise, wages will rise. When wages will rise, economic rent will rise. Pretty simple. So economic rent is larger when workers are scarce relative to demand, meaning that if the demand is high while workers are short, there's a shortage of workers are scarce, and this would happen when demand is more than supply, right? So in this case, if demand is rising strongly and demand is going up while supply is not, or maybe supply is falling, supply does not rise proportionately to demand, it doesn't, right, matches the extent to which demand is going up, then obviously it would put upward pressure on wages in the market, in the labor market, right? And obviously then wages will rise significantly above the minimum required earnings, right? The bare minimum required earnings, right? Because obviously now you need to pay them more to work, right? Then those extra earnings become economic rent. That's what economic rent is all about. So as labor demand rises, economic rent would become larger. Remember that. Because when demand for labor will go up, the wages will go up, and when wages will go up, the gap between actual earnings, that is the wages, and the minimum required earnings would widen, right? So if I come to diagrammatically, if you look what's happening over here is that, for instance, if you have, so remember guys, so if this is the equilibrium wage W and Q, right? So the area that is under the supply curve is basically your transfer earnings, because this represents, see, the supply curve, I mean, the points on the supply curve are representing the bare minimum that you would pay the workers to sort of, I mean, the bare minimum workers would accept for this particular job, right? And so if let's say you're hiring Q1 or let's say N1 workers, and so this is like, the you can say transfer earnings for Q1 workers or N1 workers, well, this is the wage, right? So this vertical distance is representing economic rent for Q1 workers. But in order to hire Q2 workers, in order to hire, let's say, these many workers, Q2 workers, right, you would need to pay them a higher wage, because this is simply supply curve for labor is upward sloping, right? To hire more workers or to make sure that more workers are willing and able to work, you need to pay them more, right? So this is like the bare minimum that you need to give them, right? But the market wage rate is much more. So again, this is like economic rent. And so all these vertical distances all the way up till the equilibrium quantity is representing economic rent, which is simply surplus income above your transfer earnings, right? And so if these multitude of vertical distances is representing a pattern here, and so that's why we say that shaded area is representing economic rent. But the point that I'm trying to make over here is, which is very important for MCQs, is that if you see that the supply curve is elastic here, my friends, and if the supply curve is elastic, it means that the size of the economic rent would be smaller as compared to the size of the economic rent when supply curve is inelastic. And I'll come to the explanation as well. But if you look at the supply curve when it is sort of inelastic, so if you look at this case, in this case, your transfer earnings, in this case, your transfer earnings are high, right? But economic rent is low, right? I mean, this distance is low while the transfer earnings are very, very high, right? And um, while in this case, in when the supply curves over here, you have like elastic supply, and if your supply is sort of elastic, it means that workers are unskilled. Unskilled workers have elastic supply, right? And while on the other hand, if you see that you have inelastic supply here, maybe this comprises of pilots or doctors or engineers or accountants, so you have like skilled elastic supply, right? So over here what you're seeing is, or maybe neurosurgeons or something, so the transfer earnings here, the transfer earnings are um the transfer earnings are low, right? The transfer earnings are low while the economic rent is quite high because the supply is inelastic, and I'll explain the reasons as well, right? So remember, when supply is inelastic, reason number one, and supply is less as compared to demand, so that automatically pushes up wages. So that's another reason why economic rent is very high, right? So if you look at, and by the way, this entire distance is to representing total earnings. Total earning is simply the sum of your transfer earnings plus economic rent, so that's your total earnings, right? So technically, if I recap, so what exactly is transfer earnings? Transfer earning is simply the minimum payment required to keep a factor of production in its current use, while economic rent is surplus income earned above your transfer earnings, right? And like I said, if in this case what they're saying is what changes in the market will sort of cause the largest increase in economic rent. So firstly, obviously, you know the demand has to shift to the right because wages will go up. So that's reason number one. Reason number two is that over here we see the supply curve is shifting. It's mentioned the supply curve is shifting, right? So supply is shifting to the left, and not only is it shifting to the left, it's also becoming inelastic, right? And the more inelastic the supply is, we've learned in this rule that your economic rent is very high. So if the supply curve shifts to the left and the supply becomes inelastic now, maybe it's very difficult to earn this degree or enter this profession. So supply becomes inelastic, and so the size of the economic rent would be high. So so the combination that would work over here is, the answer would be that demand is going to shift to D3. Demand is going to shift to D3 while supply shifts to S2. The reason, and so again for S2, when supply shifts to S2 and demand shifts to D3, so it means that demand is more than supply, right? So when demand is more than supply, again the same reason, that if demand rises strongly while supply does not, wages rise significantly above the minimum required earnings. So again, transfer earnings would be economic rent would be very, very high. So those extra earnings would become economic rent. So that's what I'm saying. So as labor demand rises, economic rent becomes larger because the gap that is between the actual wages, which are very, very high, because supply has become not only inelastic, it has fallen as well, and again the minimum required earnings is again that widens. So the point, so sometimes students ask, why is supply elastic? So supply is elastic because you see what happens is that if labor is mobile geographically or occupationally, right, or is less educated, or let's say there's less education or training required for this particular occupation, so there's low skilled jobs for instance, then yes, in that case supply would be elastic. and your economic rent would be low while transfer earnings would be high. While in the case of inelastic labor supply, when labor is immobile, specialized skills and training is required, or maybe higher education is required, let's say by doctors or stuff like that, pilots, surgeons. So in that case, then definitely yes, your transfer earnings would be low, but economic rent would be very high. So in this case, so this question could very easily be reversed as well. Matlab they've asked about the largest increase in economic rent, they could easily ask about about transfer earnings as well, right? So the answer to this question is C for Charlie, and I hope you understood the reason for this as well. Now, question number 12, which says it's a good question, and it's a question on income inequality. And in every paper, this has been coming post 2023. Make sure that this topic is thoroughly covered. These MCQs are easy. So, policies and redistributing income and wealth, and concepts like mean tested benefits and regressive progressive taxes, and all these concepts, universal basic income and stuff like this. You should be aware of what Gini coefficient is, right? Anyways, 5 years ago the Gini coefficient of a country was 0.35, but now it is 0.4, so it has increased, which means income inequality has gone up. Which combination of policies is most likely to have been used? So the combination of policies that have been used have resulted into a rise in income inequality. Something has gone wrong for this country. So income inequality has increased. So this question is testing the understanding of Gini coefficient and income inequality for you guys. So we have to identify the policies that would have most likely made the income distribution more unequal, right? And so as far as what would cause, if you look at mean tested benefit, the mean tested benefits have to decrease for this to happen. As far as sales tax is concerned, it's regressive, so this has to increase. And corporate taxes, it's progressive, so this has to sort of decrease. And so if you look at, the answer then has to be B for boy. But let me go into a bit more detail as far as means tested benefit mainly help low income households, right? So if these benefits are reduced, then poorer households lose income support. So income inequality would worsen, so this is going to increase the Gini coefficient figure or contribute to increasing it. Increasing sales tax, again, sales tax regressive. Poor households would end up spending a larger proportion of their income on consumption. So when sales taxes would rise, poor households are affected proportionately more, and hence income inequality rises. And similarly, as far as corporate taxes, lower corporate taxes would tend to benefit business owners, shareholders, higher income groups who have a lot of money. So so lower corporate taxes wouldn't really help lower income groups. In fact, lower corporate taxes would help the upper income group of the spectrum. So lower corporate taxes would tend to benefit business owners and shareholders and higher income groups more. So post-tax incomes at the top, the post-tax incomes which are at the very top or the upper end of the income spectrum, those incomes would rise much, much faster as compared to incomes at the lower end of the spectrum, right? This would again widen income inequality. So you have to understand this. Corporate taxes are taxes imposed on businesses, right? So if you're reducing, not poor households don't have businesses, right? So while they are progressive, we get it, they are progressive, but it won't really help lower income groups in that context. It won't really contribute to reducing income inequality in that context. If you're decreasing corporate taxes, that's the best possible answer. With increase and decrease, then this can't just, there's no MCQ option that says this could increase, right? This has to decrease then. So this is the best possible answer, and this is the right answer as well, because lower corporate taxes would be benefiting business owners and shareholders. So in that context, maybe the lower income groups won't benefit. So this is going to widen income inequality in that aspect, right? So that's why boy is the correct answer. For question number 13, this is a good question. The diagram shows the introduction of a national minimum wage, WM, in an occupation where workers are employed by a profit maximizing monopolist. Now, before I move, so what happened to total wages? Now, total wages is simply wage times the number of workers employed, right? Okay, so but in a monopoly labor market, you need to understand what a monopolist is. So the monopoly employer has wage setting power because it is dominant. It is a dominant buyer of labor, right? Maybe the only firm that employs workers in the area, for instance. So unlike a perfectly competitive labor market where firms are wage takers, the monopolist would face an upward sloping labor supply curve like this, right? uh, Directly, it would face an upward sloping supply curve directly, which means that the monopolist itself would face an upward sloping labor supply curve directly, which means that if the firm wants to hire more workers, it must offer higher wages. But the important point is that when the monopolist would raise the wages to attract additional workers, it usually has to raise the wages for all the existing workers. And because of this, what happens is that the marginal cost of labor then rises faster than the wage rate. So that is why the MCL lies above the labor supply curve. Now, initially, the monopolist would hire workers up to the point where MRPL equals MCL, which is MRPL equals MCL would be this point. So it would hire Q1 workers, but it would pay them wages, which is, W1 wages, right? So we know that concept. So the monopolist would maximize its profits by hiring MRPL workers equal. It would maximize profits where MRPL equals MCL, which would result in lower wages and lower employment levels compared to competitive labor market equilibrium, right? But then when a minimum wage is imposed, this changes everything, right? So when the government imposes WM, right, something interesting is happening. And if you see that up to the point of Q3, workers, the firm can hire workers at a fixed wage rate of WM without needing to raise wages further. So it could hire wages at the same wage rate of WM without needing to increase wages, which means that this horizontal line then becomes the MCL for workers. So the MCL curve becomes horizontal, right, and equal to the minimum wage over this particular range. And after Q3, the MCL would sort of, there's a discontinuity in MCL, and then MCL would rise beyond Q3, right? We know that. We've studied that in labor market. So what you're saying is, but what the interesting part is, you look at this. So, what we're saying is that up to Q3, look at this. Up to Q3, the firm can hire workers at the fixed wage rate WM without needing to raise wages. So MCL becomes horizontal and becomes equal to minimum wage at that rate. So MCL becomes horizontal, right? But only up till Q3, right? Because Q3 is the point where the minimum wage intersects the labor supply curve, right? And what this means is that, by the way, so after the minimum wage is imposed, how many workers are employed? Well, Q3 is employed, and one of the intuitive reasons for this is, I'll tell you the intuitive reason for this. Just not rectify this. Don't rote learn this. The intuitive reason for this is that, you see, initially how many workers are employed? Initially, the monopolist is employing Q1 workers before the minimum wage, but now so to employ Q1 workers, let's say at Q1, this is the marginal labor cost. Just ignore the MRPL line. Just look at this line. So this is your marginal labor cost, right? This line, this entire line. So this is your MCL at this point. And for Q3 workers, initially, if you had to hire Q3 workers before the minimum wage was imposed, so let's say this is your MCL, right? So for all these extra workers, this range is representing MCL, which is quite high. But after the minimum wage is imposed, for all these extra workers, minimum wage line is the MCL line up till Q3. So ideally, for all these extra workers, the marginal cost is actually quite low, which is this area is the marginal cost. So technically it's quite low, and because marginal cost is low, firms would end up hiring more workers. So this is the intuitive reason behind this, actually. So what you're saying is that since the minimum wage lowers the marginal cost of labor compared to before, and that sort of encourages the monopolists to hire more workers, so the monopolists end up hiring Q3 workers, right? So beyond Q3 workers, remember that beyond Q3, workers are not willing to work for only WM. And beyond Q3, the firm would need to raise wages again to attract more workers, causing the labor supply curve to be sort of upward sloping. And beyond Q3, the labor supply curve is upward sloping, and again the MCL curve is upward sloping as well. It rises sharply again, right? So so employment expands, guys, from Q1 to Q3 then, right? Okay, so there is something that you should be knowing, and the reason why employment is expanding is because the minimum wage keeps the MCL artificially low and constant. It keeps the MCL artificially low and sort of constant up to this point, Q3. So the workers would be hired. I mean, Q3 workers are now hired, right? So it keeps the MCL artificially low and constant up to that point, and hence it sort of allows the monopolists to profitably increase employment levels, right? Until this flat section of the minimum wage MCL curve ends. So until this flat section of the minimum wage MCL section ends, the monopolist could profitably increase wages because, right, the monopolist could profitably increase your employment, right? Now, all of this wasn't really required for the MCQ, but I just wanted to brief you guys up because in labor market MCQs do come. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to give you some background context. Now, the question is, what happened to total? I mean, this is a pretty goddamn easy question. What happened to total wages received by workers in the occupation? So initially, the wage cost or the wages that are the total wage earnings are OW1 Q1 because this is the amount of Q1 workers hired, W1 wages paid. That's all. This entire area was the wage. That was the wage income or the wage income for the workers or the wage being paid. And now Q3 workers are hired at WM. So this is now the entire this entire big box. So it increases from the answer has to be, I guess, D or something. It increases from what? It increases from OW1XQ1 OW1XQ1 to OWM UQ3, yeah, to UQ. So we're right, yeah, got it. So that is what makes D, question number 13, David, the correct answer. Now, question number 14 says investment in education and training is likely to reduce which type of unemployment? A pretty simple question that, I mean, just by looking at it, you can see the answer. The answer is structural unemployment, and it's pretty simple because we know that structural unemployment occurs when workers' skills do not obviously match the skills that are demanded by the industry or the employers, and because of a technological change, or maybe the industry demand is changing, or maybe automation, the industry is declining. So, but the thing is that education and training is going to help improve the workers' skills and adaptability, and hence make them more employable. So that is why option C should be the correct option. A, B, and D are incorrect options. And by the way, volunteer employment occurs when people choose not to work at the current wages themselves. So training does not directly sort of solve this. And even, A and B, training will not solve this. So, yes, because cyclical unemployment is caused due to lack of AD during recession. So training alone does not solve lack of demand. Anyways, coming to question number 15, and question number 15 says that an estimate of the consumption function of an economy is given by the equation C equals 10,000 plus 0.8y, and where C is consumption, Y is income. What conclusions can be drawn from this information? Now, C equals to 10,000 plus 0.8y. Now, here 0.8 is the marginal propensity to consume, right? MPC, which means that for every extra $1 of income, consumption in the economy would rise by 0.8. Right, and so MPC is 0.8, and this is sort of induced consumption, right? So because for every $1, 0.8 consumption is going up, which is representing the MPC. Now APC stands for average propensity to consume, and the formula is C upon Y, total consumption upon income. Now the thing is that you have an autonomous consumption here, which is independent of income, 10,000. So which means that if this is induced consumption and 10,000 is already there, so I mean the consumption of 10,000, right? So consumption would always be, the total consumption, it means that, total consumption in the economy would always be more than just 0.8. Why? Because you have an autonomous consumption as well. So APC would equal C over Y, that is 10,000 autonomous consumption plus 0.8y, which is induced consumption, divided by your total income. And this means that APC will always be greater than MPC because the extra 10,000 raises the average consumption above 0.8. Um, I mean, right. So the correct answer has to be D. So the average propensity to consume is greater than the marginal propensity to consume, and the others are wrong. A is wrong because APC is not constant. Secondly, B is wrong because APC would actually fall as incomes would go up, and C is also wrong because APC is not equal to MPC even because autonomous consumption exists, so it's not equal, right? Moreover, just to sort of give a more clearer explanation to this, you have to understand that average propensity to consume is always greater than marginal propensity to consume, especially in this question, obviously, because the consumption function contains this autonomous consumption, right? Which means that, so you see, point at MPC means that 80% of every extra dollar of income is spent on consumption. But consumers are not just spending 80% of every extra dollar, they're also spending an additional fixed amount of 10,000 even when income is, let's say, low or zero. So even if the income is zero, so this whole value would be zero, but still 10,000 would be spent, right? So the extra 10,000 gets included in the total consumption now, right? So it makes the average consumption larger than just 0.8y. The APC is it makes the average consumption larger than just 0.8y, right? So APC would always be greater than MPC because APC would include both the induced consumption and the autonomous consumption, while the MPC only measures the extra consumption from just an increase in a dollar of income, right? So that is the reason why this answer is basically D. So you must know the correct reason. Now coming to question number 16, it says investment is involved in both accelerator and the multiplier. What is the nature of investment in each case? Now in the multiplier, you see in the multiplier, the original increase in investment, or let's say investment is an injection, by the way. So the original increase in injection or the original increase in investment is usually autonomous investment in the multiplier because it's an injection, right? So it's an autonomous, and by the way, investment is autonomous, right? That's what we assume. So this means that it is not directly caused by a changes in the national income. That's what autonomous investment means. For example, then what changes investment, and what is it does it depends on? If it doesn't depend on national income, it depends upon business confidence, let's say, or maybe some changes in government policy. Let's say if the business is confident about the future of the economy, then investment will go up. So autonomous investment is autonomous. But the accelerator theory says, okay, fine, hang on. Well, we do agree that it is autonomous, but some investment is induced as well, especially when investment is induced, meaning that investment would change because income and demand is changing. So if demand for goods is rising and that is causing the national income to go up at a very fast rate, investment in the economy would increase. You would need new machines. So firms may need more capital equipment, so investment would rise. So multiplier is basically and we've also learned in paper 4 that how the multiplier and accelerator interact with each other. So multiplier is more of autonomous. So multiplier is where the autonomous investment sort of starts the process of the multiplier. So once autonomous investment is done, that sort of kicks off the multiplier, right, process, and which causes the national income to just go on keeping on increasing at a faster rate, and then that causes the accelerator to sort of kick in. So while accelerator is when your induced investment is responding to changes in income and national output and national income. If that's going up at a faster rate, accelerator kicks in. So in that sense, the answer to question number 16 has to be C for Charlie, right? Moving on to question number 17, which says the country's velocity of circulation is constant if the money supply goes up by 4% and real output grows by 3%. What will be the approximate change in the money supply? Now, this question is from the quantity theory of money, where MV equals PT. Where monetarists always have claimed that money is always and everywhere a monetary phenomena. And so, well, let's not go into those details because that is not really relevant for the MCQ. However, I'll tell you what is relevant for this MCQ. So you must know, so if MV equals PT, M is money supply, velocity of circulation of money, which the monetarist assumed as constant. P is your average price level, T is your real GDP or the number of transactions. And if you multiply P times T, you multiply the output by the price level, you sort of get the nominal GDP. Now, basically what you need to understand for these type of MCQs is that if you are given percentage changes of in money supply and percentage changes in real GDP, then you will use this particular formula. You will say percentage, and so you're sort of rearranging this formula, but you're actually using it. You'll only use this when you are given percentage changes. So percentage change in M plus the percentage change in V. So you have MV here, right? So percentage change in M plus percentage change in V equals percentage change in P plus percentage change in Y. Y means your output. So if you're assuming velocity as constant, because in this question velocity is constant is given, but however if in a particular question velocity is not assumed constant and they have given the percentage change in the velocity, then you will apply that percentage change in the formula, whatever the value is given. But here it's 0. So in this case, what you'll say is that since this is 0, so we can just remove this and say percentage change in M equals percentage change in P plus percentage change in Y. So you need to calculate the percentage change in P, right? Because that's what they're saying. What is the approximate change in price level? So percentage change in P equals percentage change in M minus percentage change in Y, which is 4% minus 3%. So remember, learn this formula. You will use this formula because oftentimes they usually give these values and they ask you to calculate changes. Sometimes they could even give you the percentage change in price level and maybe ask you about the percentage change. I mean, they could ask you what is the change in real GDP, right? So you will use this formula, learn that. But intuitively what this means is that if there's a 4% jump in more money supply, but economy just grows up in terms of output by 3%, so that extra 1% is upward pressure on prices. So this is pretty simple. MCQ question number 18. As far as question number 18 is concerned, question 18 says there are different measures of money supply ranging from narrow money to broad money. Why are these different measures necessary? So what this question is asking you, that why don't economists have just one measure of money supply? And the answer is that money exists in different forms, and not all forms of money can be used the same way. For example, let's say if you have notes and coins, notes and coins in your pocket can be spent immediately to buy something, maybe a grocery or something. But the money in your saving account in the bank cannot usually be spent directly. It may need to be withdrawn first, or may need to be transferred somewhere and then transacted. Similarly, current account deposits are much more, let's say, certain deposits that are kept in the bank are more long term, where interest is earned as well, and while some deposits are, let's say, short term and they're more liquid. And because these different forms of money perform different functions of money to different degrees, economists sort of create different measures such as narrow money and broad money. So narrow money, when you say narrow money includes the most liquid forms. So they have like the most liquid forms of money. When you say they have the most liquid forms of money, it means that and obviously if you have the money is in the most liquid form, you're actually using it as a medium of exchange. While broad money would include other deposits as well, and let's say near money assets, other deposits and let's say near money assets, which are that also store value, right? So money is performing different functions. Here it's performing the function of medium of exchange, while broad money could be used as store of value. Maybe you're depositing money in a savings account earning interest, or just depositing it, let's say. So here money is performing the function of store of value when it comes to, let's say, broad money, right? And so ultimately, and then yes, that money could be used for spending as well. So what you're saying is that it's performing other functions like the store of value and can ultimately be used for spending. Therefore, these different measures like narrow money, broad money are actually necessary because they reflect different ways of money, the different ways in which money performs its functions in the economy, and it actually gives the government and the policymakers a more accurate view or picture of the amount of purchasing power that is available in the economy. That is what makes David the correct answer, because of the need to reflect different functions that money sort of performs, right? That's why the answer to question number 18 is David. While A, B, C are sort of incorrect, because A says because different countries have their own national measures of money supply. I mean, well, fine, countries may use slightly different definitions of money, but that is not why different measures exist. I mean, they're asking why do these different measures exist? Secondly, option B, because of disagreement among economists upon the importance of money supply. This is again not mainly, I mean, different measures don't exist because of disagreements among economists. And C is incorrect because of the need to produce different measures of inflation. Different measures of money supply, like narrow broad money, are not created to measure inflation. Right? So that is what makes 18, David. 19 says the diagram shows quarterly changes over, sorry, the 19 says the diagram shows quarterly changes in Japan's GDP over several years. How many recessions occurred in Japan during this period? So on the horizontal axis, you have like 6 years given, and then you have growth rates given. Remember, so this is your real GDP growth rate. And if your real GDP growth rate is actually in percentage growth is actually in negative, that is indicating that your real GDP is falling. And recession, by definition, what happens is two things happen in recession. Firstly, your real GDP percentage becomes negative, so you have like negative growth. But not just negative growth, it also depends upon the time frame. So negative growth for two successive quarters. When you talk about two successive quarters, you're talking about the fact that you have your real GDP is going down. It's negative for a consecutive period or successive period of 6 months, that is two consecutive quarters, right? Now, how many recessions occurred in the period during this? So obviously what you need to do is that you need to graphically see that, for example, if you see between up to 2 years in this time period, how many times consecutively you can see this data is showing a negative growth rate. So you can see a consecutive time period where the negative growth rate was going down. So you have like this is showing you a recessionary phase or a recession. Again, this is showing you a recession because of the consecutive decline in negative real GDP growth. Again, this is showing you, between from let's say year 4 to year 5, you're again witnessing negative growth rates, right? So this is the fact that these bar charts are drawn, consecutive to each other, is representing a sustained, consistent, persistent decline in real GDP, right, over a certain period of months. Right, while if you look at this is also showing negative growth rate, but then the growth rate becomes positive. So this can't really reflect a recession, right? Right. So again, it shows that how many recessions occurred in Japan during this period. So over the period of 6 years, we can say that 3 recessions occurred. So that is what 19 boy is the correct answer. This is just, I mean, this MCQ is testing your economic knowledge, that how can you sort of decipher a data where time frame and growth rates are given. So this is a good MCQ, right? Now moving on to the next question. Question number 20 says, what is shown by the short-run Phillips curve? Now these sort of questions about short-run, long-run Phillips curve have now recently been tested a lot in almost every paper. So make sure that this topic is thoroughly covered. We all know what Phillips curve shows. It shows a negative relation between inflation rate and unemployment. Or do remember, it's showing a negative relation, inverse relation between inflation rate and unemployment. Remember that unemployment rate, right? Unemployment rate in percentage and inflation rate in percentage, not a negative relation between general price level and the number of unemployed. It's a inverse relation between the percentage changes, that is inflation rate and unemployment rate. So boy is the correct answer for question number 20. 21 says, what is 21? 21 is saying, what is the reason for a central bank to decrease the interest rate? Now, what is the reason for central bank to decrease? Central bank, obviously, it's an monetary expansionary policy. So, to attract hot money inflows, no, that should not be the correct answer, to attract hot money inflows, because you see, lower interest rates would usually make a currency less attractive to foreign investors. So hot money inflows are more likely to fall, not rise. Maybe there would be more hot money outflow. So this is incorrect. B says, to discourage private sector borrowing for investment, lower interest rates would encourage borrowing for investment, not discourage it. This makes it incorrect as well. C says to increase aggregate demand and aggregate supply in the economy. Yes, this is correct. To increase AD and AS, because AD would rise because obviously consumers and firms would borrow more to invest, and C and I are basically your components of AD. And why would AS increase? AS would increase in the long run because when firms would invest, they would invest in new machinery technology. So productive capacity would expand and productive potential will rise, shifting your aggregate supply in the long run to the right as well. So 21 should be C for Charlie. Question number and right. So and option D was incorrect as well because it's talking about slowing the rate of domestic prices. Lower interest rate would increase spending and hence may create inflationary pressures actually, at least in the short run to, but if LRA shifts outward later on in the long run, then it may stabilize prices. But yeah. 22 says it's a question on currency devaluation and connected to J curve and the Marshall-Lerner condition. It's saying the currency is devalued over what time period and for what type of economy is there likely to be the greatest improvement in the national income. You have to understand that usually they sort of give you, they test you concepts and they sort of give you these confusing options where they'll purposely try to fit in different columns to make you think a lot, but it's just the same concept. So, first, what is devaluation? Central bank is artificially reducing the value of the currency to maintain it in a fixed exchange rate system, right? It's in a pegged exchange rate system. So the currency value is, let's say, if the central bank basically devalues the currency, then devaluation is going to make your exports cheaper to foreigners, right? So the price of exports would go down while imports would get expensive for domestic consumers. So as a result, X will go down, M will go up. So net exports is actually gonna, sorry, my bad. Okay, exports will go up, imports will go down, net exports will actually go up, which will actually increase AD and national income. So the correct answer for this has to be over what time period, what type of economy. So this obviously will only work for an open economy. And what time period would it improve national income? Obviously, it will improve national income in the long run. So the correct answer has to be boy. But why are we saying why do we need an open economy for this? Because a closed economy has no foreign trade. So if there are no exports or imports, then changing the exchange rate would have no effect, right? Therefore, devaluation would only be meaningful in an open economy, right? And why the long run? The long run because after devaluation, we know that export and import quantities may not change very much immediately because contracts already exist and consumers take time to adjust. And this is actually modeled through the J curve. You see, when you talk about the J curve, and by the way, the Marshall-Lerner condition, J curve is simply the diagrammatic representation of the Marshall-Lerner condition. So you have to understand the Marshall-Lerner condition where the price elasticity of demand for exports and the price elasticity of demand for import has to be greater than 1. Marshall and Lerner, they were two economists. So Marshall-Lerner condition will not be achieved in the short run. You need to understand this. Marshall-Lerner condition will not be achieved in the short run. Because of that, what will happen is that if you have a trade deficit, it will sort of worsen before it starts improving, and then your current account will actually improve in the long run. So you have a trade surplus, in the long run. So what you're saying is that what we're essentially trying to say is that in the short run, the PD for exports and imports is likely to be inelastic in the short run. And the reason is because of contractual agreements. And, firms and countries have made contractual agreements for, let's say, 3-4 years, maybe long-term contracts. It makes it difficult for countries to immediately switch from where they're buying products and selling and to, and whom they're selling to. So it's difficult for them to buy and sell, to switch where they're buying and selling internationally, and consumers and firms would often also take a while to adjust to these changes in exchange rates and to, let's say, if the price of imports is going up, to find alternative substitutes, right? And so hence there's a time lag, right? There's a huge time lag, and this results into the J curve, which is a diagrammatic representation of the Marshall-Lerner condition. So it's a J shape, right, where the current account position is actually worsening before it, initial deficit worsens and before it improves, and you're actually recording a surplus in this region over a noticeable time lag. So there's a huge time lag, right? So in the long run, the Marshall-Lerner condition would be met because the PD for exports and imports would then be greater than 1. Right? So that's what it is. So the time period, long run, type of economy, open economy. And so that is exactly what the question was also asking you. So improvement, and the reason, see, when point is that in the long run, what will happen is, in the long run, your net exports will improve basically, and your current account would record a surplus. And when your current account is recording a surplus, and in the long run, your net exports are improving, meaning your exports are going up and imports are falling, it simply means that national income would go up, because net exports are a component of AD. So if your current account would record a surplus, it would record a rise in real GDP. Then national income has to go up, right? So that's what it was saying: greatest improvement in national income, right? So the other answer options are incorrect. A is wrong because it talks about a closed economy, right? And D, although it's mentioning open economy, but the largest improvement is seen in the long run, not in the short run. Question number 23 says, how might an increase in surplus on the current account of the BOP affect other macroeconomic objectives in the short run? Now, conflict between macroeconomic objective MCQs are also now tested a lot. The thing is, the answer has to be D for David, because when there's a current account surplus, you have a rise in net exports, your AD would go up, it would create inflationary pressures, because there's a very strong demand and strong spending that will create inflationary pressure. So if spending is growing faster than output, that would create inflationary pressures in the short run. So the reason why we're saying short run, this conflict exists in the short run, is because maybe in the long run, if aggregate supply goes up or productive capacity expands, then prices may stabilize in the economy. So at least you have this trade-off in the short run when AD is going up with inflation, right? So, and technically Cambridge is testing the idea that even a favorable current account position can create problems. A larger surplus would obviously mean very strong aggregate demand, which will contribute to inflationary pressures if the economy is, approaching capacity, let's say. So 23 has to be D for David. Moving on to question number 24, it says the diagram shows an economy short-run equilibrium at E1, price level P1, Y1, and obviously the equilibrium has changed to P2, Y2. Which combination is most likely to be achieved in the economy at equilibrium E2? Now, since AD is going up, so it could represent a sign of economic growth, and or it could also represent, so this sort of seems correct, this seems correct, and sort of this seems correct as well. So the answer, by the way, is C for Charlie, but let's see why is it C first. So what's happening here is that as AD is going up, you're witnessing real GDP growth, right? And positive output gap has opened up, but the firm is receiving more orders, you're increasing production, hiring more workers, using more resources, so employment is rising. That's why the first call, this is correct. Employment is rising and real GDP is rising as well. So if real GDP is rising, it means it would result in increase in per capita income as well. So instead of saying real GDP, they just wrote increase in per capita income, that is average incomes are rising in the economy, right? Got it? So that's why C is the correct answer. A is wrong. Why is A wrong? Because it says, if you look at this, increase international competitive is likely to decrease because of a rise in price level. Exports will get uncompetitive, so current account may be in a deficit. So the fact, so saying so, right? So and plus, since national income is going up, maybe imports start increasing. So because consumers might import because of a higher GDP growth and income, so your current account deficit won't reduce, it will increase. So this is incorrect as well. Reduced exchange rate, the diagram doesn't tell us anything about exchange rate, so we can't really say about exchange rate. But reduced inflation, this is wrong, inflation is going up. Reduced environmental degradation is sort of incorrect, because higher output means more production and potentially more pollution as well. But this is true, increased economic growth, but then this part is incorrect, so both columns have to be correct. So C is the correct answer. 25, again, free trade area, custom unions, they are now testing MCQs on this post 2023. So make sure you're aware of what a free trade area is, what a custom union is. So the correct answer, what is likely to be found in a free trade area? So see, a free trade area is a group of countries, right? So let's say 3-4 countries, they sort of agree to remove trade barriers amongst themselves. So they would say, okay, fine, from tomorrow, from today, no tariffs, no quotas amongst each other. So no tariffs, no quotas between member countries. That is what a free trade area is. And inside the free trade area, there's no tariff between the members amongst themselves. So country A, B, C, if they form a free trade area, there's no tariff between A, B, C. But you see, the thing is that each member country, that is each country A, B, and C, can maintain its own trade barriers against non-members. So maybe let's say a non-member country like D or E or F, country A might maintain a 10% tariff, while a country B can maintain a 25% tariff with DEF, or maybe country C could just maintain a quota instead of a tariff. So it's their own choice. So each member country can maintain their own trade barriers against the non-members. Therefore, a country inside the FTA may still impose, member countries may still impose tariffs on imports that are coming from countries that are outside the free trade area, that are non-members, outside the agreement, right? That's what option A describes. So you need to know what custom unions are. Usually students mess up. And by the way, what the common difference between free trade area and custom union is that a custom union also operates like a free trade area. That between the member countries there won't be any, trade barriers, no tariffs, no quotas. But instead in a free trade area, country ABC could impose their own trade barriers with non-member countries. But in a custom union, country ABC would have a common external tariff. It's called a common external tariff. So country A, B, and C would say, if they're part of a trade union, if they're part of a custom union, they would say that we'll impose a 10% tariff for all the non-member countries. So it would be common and consistent amongst the member countries. It's called a common external tariff. So many students do confuse FTAs with custom union. You should know that. Anyways, moving to question number 26. Again, easy question. What is not included in Human Development Index, HDI? The correct answer is A for alpha, infant mortality rate. See, HDI is a broader measure of development rather than GDP alone. So we know that it's a composite index. It measures 3 dimensions. It measures 3 indicators: health, which is measured by life expectancy at birth; then education, which is measured using mean years of schooling, or let's say expected years of schooling. So yeah, this is right. These are included, and it measures GNI per capita as well. So again, the only thing it doesn't measure is infant mortality rate, right? Got it. Anyways, moving to question number 27. Again, questions on IMF, World Bank are now tested. So a multilateral organization that provides loans and grants to governments of low and middle income countries for the purpose of pursuing capital projects. So obviously this organization is the World Bank, because that's the job of the World Bank. The question describes an organization that is providing loans and grants to low and middle income countries for capital projects and development projects, and that is exactly what the role of the World Bank is. The World Bank finances long-term development projects like roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, electricity generation, water supply systems. Its main objective is to promote economic development, reduce poverty, higher living standards, IMF, and now as far as IMF is concerned, IMF is basically mainly provides short-term financial assistance, right? It provides short-term financial assistance, or it sort of provides a balance of payment support, especially when you are suffering from a balance of payment crisis and the country is going to go towards a default. Or IMF provides emergency loans during economic crisis. Let's say you have a flood, or maybe you have a very deep recession, so it might support that for that time. So IMF is not primarily going to finance development projects. Got it? Anyways, the US Central Bank US Federal Reserve manages US monetary policy. It does not provide development loans to poor economies. And WTO promotes free trade and settles trade disputes. Remember that. It's the governing body for international trade. It does not provide development loans. By the way, you must know what WTO, IMF, and the World Banks are. Anyway, so World Bank sort of builds while the IMF is there to, in terms of when the economy is suffering from a monetary crisis or something. Now, question number 28. Again, a very repeated sort of an MCQ. It says during a year, a country's national income in money terms went up by 3%. So nominal income going up by 3%, prices are going up by 4%, and the total population goes up by 1%. What is the approximate change in real income per head? Now you see, if money national income is going up by 3% and prices rising by 4%, so what is the real income growth? So see, when we say growth, we are measuring it in percentage terms. So real income growth is like 3% minus 4%. So real GDP growth is going down. So this is your real GDP growth going down by 1%. So real GDP growth or real national income. So real national income is falling by 1%, right? Now we need to add, now you see, now it says population goes up by 1%. Population goes up by 1%. And by the way, and so what is the change in real income per head? Real income per head is simply talking about real GDP per capita. So real income per head is real GDP per capita, or per capita income, which is simply real national income divided by the population. Now, remember, guys, I want you to understand this. When you're using this formula, you're finding out real income per head. You're actually on the numerator and the denominator on this, in this formula, you're measuring monetary values, not percentage changes. Remember that, right? But if, let's say, you have percentage changes given which are very small, so what will you do in this case, by the way, if you have percentage changes given? So you see, you have to understand this for now. There's a mathematical rule that I will teach you guys here, and I want you to learn this shortcut that for MCQs, and learn this formula that change in, and I'll tell you the logic as well. It's change in real income per head. Change in real income per head equals to, change means percentage change, equals to nominal income growth. Nominal income growth, again in percentage terms, minus inflation rate, which is again in percentage terms. These are all in percentage terms, minus population growth. And this is all in percentage terms. Remember that. You will use this formula. I want you to learn this formula, okay? You will use this for MCQs quite often. Remember this. This is all in percentage terms. This is all in percentage terms. Remember that, okay? Now, which means that if nominal, so by the way, if you deduct nominal income growth from inflation, you have like what? Real income change in percentage terms, which is actually technically what you did was 3% minus 4%, and technically you have like minus 1%. So minus 1% minus the population growth. Population growth is again saying it went up by 1%. So minus 1% minus 1% is minus 2%, right? So the answer is minus 2%, a decrease of 2%. The answer has to be, for question number 28, the answer has to be boy. But then it brings us to the same conclusion that if real income per head is real national income divided by population, why are we using this formula? And I'll tell you the mathematical reason behind it. You have to understand that when percentage changes are small, this division can be approximated by subtraction, right? So you can, and what do I mean division can be approximated by subtraction? What I mean by this is, technically this is real income per head, but you're not finding real income per head, you're finding the percentage change in real income per head, right? So technically if you're finding the percentage change in real income per head, then this formula would technically look like this, which is percentage change in real income per head, which is real national income, let's call it Y, divided by the population, which is, let's say I'm calling it N, right? Population, I'm taking it as N, and Y as real national income. So this, like the percentage change of this entire thing, and so this could, and if I want to find this out, right, and if, let's say, which is technically the percentage change of this, technically what I want to find out is the percentage change of this divided by the percentage of this, right? So what I can do is that in mathematics, what we're saying is that you could actually end up subtracting these two, like minus 1%, minus 1%, and we're not literally like subtracting, because per capita income is, you have to understand, per capita income is still calculated by dividing national income by population. But the reason we are subtracting is only because percentage changes in a ratio, percentage changes in a ratio, percentage change of real national income or a percentage change of population. This percentage change in a ratio can be approximated, right? It can be approximated. Just a second, let me clearly draw the approximation sign. It can be approximated to by subtracting. It can be approximated by subtracting the percentage changes of the numerator and the denominator. So it could be subtracted by approximating. I mean, it could be it could be approximated. This is a sign of approximation, approximated by subtracting the percentage changes of the numerator and the denominator. So what are the percentage changes of the numerator and the denominator? Let's take the percentage change of the numerator, which is y, percentage change in y, minus the percentage change of the denominator, that is percentage change in population, that is percentage change in n. Technically what we're now doing is percentage change in y, percentage change in n, and this was a normal. So it's again rewritten. So you understand what I'm saying? This is like minus 1%, which we found out by this part of the formula, minus percentage change in n, which is minus 1%. So this gives us minus 2%. So what you're saying is that, so what you're saying, so this sign is actually an approximation sign. So it means approximately equal to. So it means that two values, so this actually means, and this actually means that, you know, these two values are not exactly equal, but they're very close to each other, right? We use this symbol. We use this symbol when the exact answer is either difficult, or let's say it's not really necessary for us, or when we are using a shortcut, which gives us a very, 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 very close estimate. Right. So what this then means is, guys, what this then means is that the percentage change in per capita income, because you're finding the percentage change in per capita income is actually, you know, is approximately equal to the percentage change in real income minus the percentage change in population. Right. It is not mathematically exact, but let's say for small percentage changes, the approximation is, you know, extremely close, and therefore it is sort of used as a convenient shortcut in economics. So the whole purpose ideally was to let you guys know that how do we actually, you know, end up arriving at this. So this is like a shortcut that you can use for these MCQs, or you want whatever you want to call it. You want to call it a formula, whatever. Got it? So this is, yeah, you should know this. Question number 29, it says the diagram shows a possible outcome for an economy. Now you have this environmental Kuznets curve that is given. What is the most likely reason why an economy is unable to turn at a point X towards point Y? Now, for environmental Kuznets curve, remember, so you have the horizontal axis that is showing you per capita income, the vertical axis is measuring environmental degradation. Right, so it's telling us that in the early development phase, when your per capita GDP is low and your per capita GDP is initially increasing, the level of environmental degradation or pollution is rising. But eventually a turning point is reached, which is X. And after the turning point, by the way, once the turning point is reached, after that turning point, further growth leads to less environmental damage. The environmental damage starts to sort of go down because of higher growth. Because obviously you would invest in better technological methods and less polluting technology, and you should know this, by the way. So, and in this case, point X is the turning point. So you're moving towards point Y would mean higher incomes and lower environmental degradation. But the question is asking you, why might an economy sort of fail to achieve this? And the correct answer has to be C for Charlie. Why? Because if economic growth continues to sort of rely on, you know, things like fossil fuels or heavy industry or, you know, pollution production methods, then higher GDP would actually continue to generate pollution. I mean, that's why we say that in upper income economies, high income economies, environmental pollution is low, because they use environmental friendly production methods instead of, you know, using those goods and industries that generate a lot of carbon emissions. For example, the growth of EVs, right? So if you're relying a lot on fossil fuels, heavy industry, or pollution production methods, then higher GDP will continue to generate pollution. Remember that. So the economy never sort of successfully moves into this region. The economy would never successfully move into this region. So despite higher incomes, you won't really have a turning point like this. So, it would just go on rising instead of having a turning point, right? And so environmental degradation remains high despite a higher real GDP per capita. Why are the other options wrong, by the way? A is wrong because it says a cut in indirect taxes causes a substitution effect, tax revenues continue to... option A is describing a Laffer curve, not a Kuznets curve. It's describing a Laffer curve, and is talking about tax revenues. So this nothing has to do with environmental degradation. So this is purely incorrect. Option B says a depreciation of the exchange rate increases the rate of growth. Okay, fine, a depreciation may increase growth, but it does not explain why environmental degradation cannot fall. You have to explain in this MCQ why environmental degradation may not fall despite higher GDP. Option D, there's lies greater emphasis on living standards rather than economic growth. So greater emphasis on living standards rather than growth would actually make movement towards point Y. Greater emphasis on living standards rather than growth would actually make movement towards point Y more likely. So there would be a movement towards point Y would be sort of more likely, not less likely. Right? Remember that. So option D is incorrect as well. So Charlie is the correct answer. Question 30 says, what is not a possible effect of using expenditure switching policies to reduce a deficit on the current account of the balance of payment? You must know expenditure switching policy, reducing policy is now part of A2. So the correct answer has to be A for alpha, a reduction in the domestic demand for locally made goods. By the way, first you need to understand what expenditure switching policies are. So these are policies that aim to sort of switch expenditure, away from imports. Not only that, but towards domestic products, right? So that's the whole point of switching away from imports towards domestic product. What are the different examples of expenditure switching policies? Number one, devaluation, right? Number two, currency depreciation. By the way, depreciation is automatically going to be happening, but yeah, devaluation, let's leave it till devaluation. Tariffs or quotas, these are your expenditure switching policies, right? Sometimes they usually do use the word devaluation with depreciation interchangeably in MCQs as well. Some of the old MCQs might say that a central bank might depreciate, right? So they're talking actually about devaluation. So don't worry about that. But yeah, devaluation is when there's an artificial reduction, when a central bank intervenes, while depreciation is in a floating exchange rate happening automatically. And the goal of this is to sort of improve, the goal of the expenditure switching policy is to sort of improve the current account position, right? So what happens after expenditure switching policy? Obviously, consumers would buy fewer imports and they would buy more domestic products, right? So this is actually what sort of happens, right? So demand for domestic goods rises, right? And the demand for domestic goods will not fall, it will actually rise. So this means that option A is not going to happen. So it says a reduction in domestic demand for locally made goods. Demand for domestic goods has to rise. That's what makes option, option A is the correct answer, because it says that what is not possible after using, I lost track. What is not possible of using expenditure switching policy, right? So what is not possible? A reduction in domestic demand for locally made goods and services is not possible. Why is this not possible? Because demand for domestic goods is going to rise and hence it will not fall. So yes, this is not possible. Other options, if you look at option B, yes, this is possible because retaliation from other countries is very much possible. Other countries may respond with their own tariffs and trade restrictions, and this is like a very common risk in expenditure switching policy when you're imposing tariffs and quotas. Inflation, expenditure switching policy can actually create demand for inflation because of higher AD, because your consumption switches to domestic goods. So yeah, and sometimes inflation could also happen because of cost push inflation, especially if the PD for imports is inelastic. So although it makes imports expensive, but then if it's inelastic, so cost push inflation could occur as well. This is something that you should know. Inflation could occur from both ends. As far as government revenue is concerned, yeah, government revenue is possible through tariff revenues and custom duties, and tariffs generate custom duty revenues and tariff revenues. So these are the revenues for the government. So this is also possible. So remember that. So do remember that the entire purpose of expenditure switching policy is to redirect the expenditure or spending towards domestic goods, not away from them. Objective is to redirect it towards domestic goods, not away. Therefore, a reduction in demand for domestic goods in option A directly contradicts the objective of this policy. That is why option A is the correct answer. Okay guys, so we're done with this MCQ. I'll see you all around, MCQ paper. I'll see you all around in the next paper with another video. Thank you so much for watching this video. Until then, take care.